Ahoy there, my children of the Force. Welcome to Star Wars Transmissions Weekly Q&A. I'm your boy Dan, and we've got 4 juicy questions to dive into today that I'm very excited about. So let's get started. First up, for our first question, Michael Toms asks, did Darth Bane successfully transfer his essence into Darth Zannah? And Michael discussed some other things, but in a nutshell, that his question was, did Bane successfully transfer his essence into Darth Zannah? Now, we started last week with talking about Darth Bane, so I figured let's start off this week discussing Bane as well. And what Michael's question is referring to is Darth Bane's duel with his apprentice, Darth Zannah, from the Legends novel Rule of Two, which is the 3rd book in the Darth Bane trilogy. I mentioned this last week when I was discussing Darth Bane. I really love the Darth Bane trilogy. That series of novels was written by Drew Karpyshyn, and they're really fantastic. If you've never read them before, or if you've only read part of the trilogy, I would highly recommend reading all 3 of them. They're fantastic. They're legends. Some of the information from those novels has been brought into canon. So not everything is going to be strictly just legends. Some of it has been brought into canon, but either way, it's a fantastic trilogy, and I would highly recommend reading it if you never have. So as I mentioned, Michael is asking about, at the end of Rule of Two, Darth Zannah is essentially seeking to kill Darth Bane so that she could take on the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. Because that's the whole thing with Darth Bane in the Rule of Two. The idea is that a Sith master is going to have an apprentice. The master is going to be the one essentially with the power. The Sith apprentice is going to covet that power. And when the apprentice gets strong enough over time, that is going to allow that apprentice to then kill their master. And that is going to continue on over, like we saw with Darth Sidious, over the course of a millennia, so that the Sith are going to be able to grow in strength over time, grow in strength in the shadows, underneath the Jedi's nose to some extent, behind the scenes, so that their strength can grow and they don't have to have a ton of Sith roaming the galaxy. Their strength can grow even though there's only 2 Sith at a given time. So that was Darth Bane's whole thing. So now, fast forward to the end of the Rule of Two, end of the novel, Darth Zannah wants to kill Darth Bane. Let's make this a little bigger. She wants to kill Darth Bane and take on the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. And I love this part of the duel. It's so great. And essentially the duel kind of, to some extent, is at one point it looks like it's going to be a stalemate. It looks like these two are fighting to a draw, and then it starts to look like Darth Zannah is going to be able to kill Bane, and then it kind of goes back to looking like Bane is going to kill her, and so he tries to transfer his essence into her. Now, let me explain essence transfer and what that is, so that if you're not sure what essence transfer is, you'll have an idea. In the current canon, essence transfer is called transference. So it's a little different in canon than it is in Legends. But essentially, transference is a dark side power. It was used to transfer one's consciousness to a different body through the Force. The wielder of this ability could also utilize transference to prevent the death of other beings aside from just themselves. And this ability was discovered by the with the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis, I should say. It was discovered through the Sith Order's ultimate goal of attaining immortality. Darth Plagueis was the first to harness this power of transference. Despite this, however, Plagueis, we know, was killed by his apprentice, Darth Sidious. And as Sidious fell to his death in Return of the Jedi, he used transference to transfer his consciousness into a clone of his original body, which was obviously destroyed during the Battle of Endor, where Vader hurls his ass down that reactor shaft. And that's why we see him in The Rise of Skywalker. When he transfers his body, it's a body that's not fully formed, essentially a clone body that was not, almost like a husk. And because of Sidious's dark side power, the body is essentially deteriorating rapidly. And so that's why you see in Rise of Skywalker, Sidious is hooked up to that, oh my god, what is that harness called? It's not Moment harness. It's named after a Sith Lord, and I'm totally drawing a blank in the name of the harness right now. But that's why you see Sidious in The Rise of Skywalker. He was able to transfer his essence into a clone body that was on Exegol. So now that we have that explanation out of the way, let's answer Michael's question specifically. Did Darth Bane transfer his essence successfully into Darth Zannah? Now, let me preface this by saying, when I originally read Rule of Two, my assumption was that Darth Bane was successful in transferring his essence into Zannah. That's kind of how I read that part of the story. However, the answer is he actually was not successful. And the reason why I know that answer is because author Drew Karpyshyn made a post on his website answering Michael's specific question. So let me read to you what Drew Karpyshyn wrote on his website to give you guys an idea. So Drew Karpyshyn says, I wrote the scene from Darth Cognis's point of view. Darth Cognis winds up becoming Darth Zannah's apprentice, and she looked like a potential candidate to become Darth Bane's apprentice if Bane felt that Darth Zannah was not worthy of being a Sith Lord anymore. So the duel between Darth Zannah and Darth Bane, Drew Karpyshyn wrote it from Darth Cognis's point of view. And so Drew Karpyshyn says, I wrote the scene from Darth Cognis's point of view to keep you guessing to the last instant, but when Darth Zannah proclaims Darth Bane is gone, I am I am Darth Zannah, Dark Lord of the Sith, and your new master, I thought it would be pretty clear. Karpyshyn adds that the whole thing with Zannah's hand twitching, because we get scenes with her hand twitching after Bane tried to transfer his essence into her, was only to show that some part of Bane had passed through to Zannah. How much? Was he still alive in some way, or was it just a small part of his identity imprinted on her? Supposed to be ambiguous. But I never wanted people to assume that Bane had taken over Zannah's body successfully. Karpyshyn continues to say, Bane wanted a stronger successor to overthrow him, and the only reason he learned the ritual was because he needed to prolong his life if Zannah proved to be weak. So it makes sense when you hear Drew Karpyshyn's explanation of how he decided to write out that scene. And it also makes sense when he's talking about Darth Bane's point of view as far as the rule of two. And that absolutely makes sense. But I will say, I am going to knock Drew Karpyshyn. As much as I love the Bane trilogy and all three of those books, I don't think he did such a great job of making it very clear that Darth Bane was not successful in transferring his essence into Darth Zannah. As I mentioned, I really thought that he was successful, but to how much, I wasn't entirely sure. So it does make sense that Bane failed in his attempt to transfer his essence into Zannah, and I actually think that story-wise, it's cooler that he failed. Bane's whole ideology was that the Sith needed to grow in power over time. And to do that, a Sith apprentice would need to overtake the master. So, of course, Bane would only want to prolong his life if he felt Zannah wasn't a worthy enough successor. And again, when I read that scene in Rule of Two, I honestly thought the implication was that Bane was successful in transferring his essence into Darth Zannah. But even still, fantastic. This is a fun question. As I mentioned last week, Darth Bane, one of my favorite Sith. Him and Darth Plagueis are my two favorite Sith. So I'm always down and pumped to talk about Darth Bane. So thanks for the question, Michael. Let me catch up with the chat, because the chat seems to be popping off. Sonia, welcome to the chat. I think you said Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays. Darth Bane, Rule of Two, Book 2, I thought. No, Rule of Two is the third book in the series. So Path of Destruction is the first one. Oh, is it Dynasty of Evil is the second one? And then Rule of Two is the third one? I could be mixing them up. I'm pretty sure Rule of Two is the third one, but I could be mixing them up. So check that book listing if you're not entirely sure I'm correct. So let's see what else. Valkorion. Yeah, Valkorion's a cool Sith Lord. As I mentioned last week, I played SWTOR for freaking years. So Valkorion is a cool Sith Lord. That's a, Vitiate, Valkorion, some of the characters from SWTOR. Maybe I should start dabbling with creating videos around the characters from that game, because Star Wars The Old Republic is a really fun game. Like I said, I played it for years. I was actually thinking about getting back into playing it because it's been a while since I've played that game, and definitely a good one. And it's free too, which is pretty fun. All right, let's move on to our next question, which I really like this question. TJM Guardian asks, will the Jedi Order ever be restored to its pre-Order 66 status? And I liked this question. So let's talk about it. For Star Wars to continue, I think Lucasfilm will have to eventually create an era where the Jedi Order is restored, at least to some extent. I think that's something that for sure fans want to see play out. I want to see that play out. I've mentioned this before in my videos. Danielle and I have talked about this when we've done some of our live stream breakdowns for shows. To some extent, I want Lucasfilm to get away from the Skywalker saga. As much as I love the era, the characters, Andor is proving that creating stories within that era can be great. With that said, I want Lucasfilm to start exploring new eras and new time periods within the Star Wars continuity, which is why I'm such a fan of the High Republic. The High Republic has felt like a breath of fresh air for me. So I really hope that at some point we're going to start to see the High Republic, maybe a time period beyond the sequels, maybe a time period even prior, way in the past prior to the High Republic, like the Old Republic. I think Lucasfilm, for the longevity of Star Wars, they're going to have to at some point. So with all that said, we know that Luke restored the Jedi Order for a time. It was never built up to the extent, to the height that it was right before the waning years of the Order, before Order 66. Because at that point, there was 10,000 Jedi amongst the Jedi Order. And we see the Jedi are a big part of galactic culture, right? They have a big, I don't want to say they have a big presence in the galaxy, but they're very well known. The Order is it's a big deal, right? And once Sidious and Vader, they are in control of the galaxy. Essentially, in a generation, they almost wiped the Jedi Order from the collective memory of the galaxy with the policies that they implemented, the laws that were put in place, and how the Imperial military and the Imperial bureaucracy worked and strove to eliminate the Jedi Order from collective memory, the galactic collective memory. But once the Sith are defeated in Return of the Jedi and Luke starts rebuilding the Order, it's never built up to the point that we saw in the Clone Wars and in the prequel era, right? He has some students. I don't know if we've gotten like an official number of students that he had at that time. I know in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic series, he's probably got like 10-ish students. One of them is Ben Solo. So I would say maybe at the height of his Jedi Order, there was no more than 20. I think that was probably the height of Luke's Jedi Order. Maybe 50. I think that's a big stretch. It's been a few years since I've read the Rise of Kylo Ren comic series. Pretty sure there was only like 10 to 20 students that we see Luke teaching. So his order did not get very, very big. I think that whatever character or whatever time period we are delving into post Order 66, whether it's Rey and a potential Jedi Order that she builds, or even years into the future from that point in time, one of the things that I really hope that we see from any character looking to restore the Jedi Order is that the hubris and the deficiencies of the Jedi Order during the prequel era and prior to are discussed and are thought about. Because the Jedi's dogmatic view of the Force, how the Order operated, and how they became beholden to the Republic Senate should all be cautionary tales for any future Jedi looking to restore the Order. You know, there's a really excellent one-shot comic. It's Qui-Gon's Age of Republic comic. And I love that comic. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in that comic is Qui-Gon is kind of conflicted. The comic starts off with him helping these species, and I can't remember exactly what he was doing, but he winds up helping these species. There's a conflict on the planet. He takes this individual to Coruscant, and during his discussion, he starts to feel conflicted about how the Jedi Order is operating, their views on the Force, and he has a conversation with Yoda. And I've mentioned this before. I freaking love Yoda. Yoda is one of my favorite characters, but my boy is part of the reason why the Jedi Order wound up toppling. And Qui-Gon is mentioning to Yoda how he feels like the Jedi have become more like soldiers. And Yoda says to him something to the effect of, the Jedi Council would disagree with you. And that line stuck out to me because Qui-Gon is 100% right. This is before the Clone Wars has begun, and we know what is going to come. And Qui-Gon understood that. And he was at odds with the Jedi Order. So that their dogmatic views, the fact that they were beholden to the whims of the Senate was problematic. So those are things that I hope that whenever we do start to delve into a new Jedi Order being built, that those are things that are discussed in the story that's exploring the creation of a new Jedi Order. One of the things that I love, sticking with my homeboy Yoda, one of the things that I love about the High Republic is that it does provide a picture for fans to see the difference in the Jedi during that time period as opposed to the Jedi during the prequels. Even with regards to something as simple as having relationships with people. In the High Republic, it was known and understood that Padawans would have physical and emotional relationships with one another. In light of the Jedi, we essentially learned that Padawans would get down and dirty with each other. And it was kind of like, hey, we know it's happening. We're going to kind of turn a blind eye to it, sort of a thing. Think about that. Think about that and how that differs from the Jedi during the prequel era and the Jedi Order that we see during the Clone Wars, during the Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith. Very different, very different orders. I mean, think about our poor homeboy Anakin and our homegirl Padme. Those two had to clap cheeks completely in hiding for fear that their relationship would cause Anakin to be ousted from the Jedi Order before he became a knight. And then once he was a Jedi Knight, and then for Padme, the fear was that their relationship would negatively impact and affect her work as a senator, right? That's kind of sad when you think about that these are two people that are in love with each other and they can't be together. It was mainly because of Anakin's role as a Jedi, but still, that is still very sad when you think about it. Now, let me just state that in the High Republic, once a Padawan became a Jedi Knight, the expectation was that, all right, we kind of turned a blind eye to you getting freaky. Now you got to put those ways aside and you got to live a life of celibacy, which is still pretty whack. That is still pretty freaking whack. But at least it's different. It's a little bit more of an easier pill to swallow than the Jedi Order during the prequel eras. And again, that's a pretty stark difference between those two eras. And so I think that if and when the Jedi Order is rebuilt in canon, it would be wise for the Jedi to discuss and analyze the flaws that aided in Darth Sidious's ability to topple the Jedi Order and use those lessons learned as a guide to create a new Jedi Order. I think that that has to be considered by any author, whether it's for a book, a comic, show, or a movie. I really hope that that's something that is baked into that story, because one of the things that I love so much about the Clone Wars animated series and comics and novels that take place during that time, it is really to show us how flawed the Jedi Order had become. So I think that whenever we do start to delve into stories about a new Jedi Order being created after Order 66 and post Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order, that hubris of the Jedi need to be baked into the story. At least I hope that's baked into the story. Right? Think of one other thing I just want to quickly mention, right? Because I'm looking at this image here. Think about the Jedi Order and how they live during this time and the temple that they live in, right? So essentially, during the High Republic, the Jedi Order had outposts spread out across the galaxy. So there were these small outposts all over the galaxy. And what we learn in the High Republic is that there would be only a handful of Jedi essentially operating out of outposts. Some were larger than others, so they would have more Jedi. But essentially, the idea was the Jedi would have a presence all across the galaxy so that they could be able to help out galactic citizens on smaller scale issues that they might have, but so that they could have a presence across the galaxy and aid people whenever necessary. But when we compare that to the Clone Wars, that is not the case. I think in the Clone Wars, we get mentioned there's the temple on Edith. There's obviously the Jedi Grand Temple on Coruscant. I'm not sure if there's other Jedi temples around at this point. I'd have to research that more, because those are the Temple of Edith, the Jedi Grand Temple on Coruscant. Those are the two right now that are coming to mind. I believe there are more, but I'm drawing a blank right now. But essentially, for the most part, they were really just operating on Coruscant. And when you think about that, that's kind of messed up when they're supposed to be bastions of peace and justice, right? You're only operating within the core of the galaxy. And at that point, they had become servants to the Senate. They got away from that idea of serving the Force and serving people and focused more on serving the Senate and their whims. So that needs to be something the new Jedi Order needs to avoid, right? Think about the Jedi temples that we see both on Ahch-To during The Last Jedi. I think we see it in Rise of Skywalker. I can't remember. but also the Jedi Temple on Tython that we see in The Mandalorian. They are very bare bones temples. And we learn in Shadow of the Sith a little bit about the temple on Tython. I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't read that book yet. But either way, they're still very minimal, very bare Jedi temples. And then think about that compared to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. It's very opulent, right? When you look at the Jedi Temple, it's a very opulent temple. And I understand that, you know, a grand temple, the headquarters of an order, probably is going to be an opulent, majestic building, but kind of a bad look when that's essentially where you're pretty much only operating out of these days, or for the majority of the Jedi are operating out of the Jedi Grand Temple, when the vast majority of people on Coruscant live in squalor, and a lot of people across the galaxy live in squalor. So it's not a good look, right? So now, to answer TJ's question, because that was a long-winded tirade about the Jedi Order and their flaws. But to answer TJ's question, at some point, the Jedi Order will definitely be restored. And it's going to be restored in a way where the Jedi have a hefty presence in the galaxy, or have way more numbers within their ranks than what Luke was able to accomplish. Because at some point, the Star Wars timeline is going to have to go beyond the Skywalker saga. And to do so, I think there needs to be a restored Jedi Order to be able to make a good story. I think that's got to happen. There are rumors circulating that Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni met with the production company, Production IG, the studio that created the Star Wars Visions episode, The Ninth Jedi. There's rumors circulating that they had a meeting to potentially discuss making some sort of Star Wars story. The impression that I got from the impression of how I felt fans reacted to Visions, and especially The Ninth Jedi, was very positive. And I think Lucasfilm understands that. And I happen to think that if we're getting, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? And it was Star Wars Newsnet that mentioned that rumor. And I usually trust them when they're posting rumors. That would be dope. I mentioned in, was it last week or the week before, in one of the recent Q&As, how much I love The Ninth Jedi and what that story is about. That would be so dope. The Ninth Jedi, if you haven't seen it before, it takes place in a time period where the Sith seem to be in abundance, while the Jedi are near extinct at that point, and a single Jedi Master is looking to restore the Jedi Order. So sign me the hell up. I would be all for exploring, hey, the Sith, there is no rule of two. The Sith are in abundance at this point. They control the galaxy, and now we have a small number of Jedi looking to restore the Jedi Order and defeat the Sith. Dude, sign me the hell up for that. And getting to see the restoration of the Jedi Order while fighting the Sith, that would be so dope. I would be all about that. You know, for many fans, myself included, make this bad boy bigger. You know, Star Wars is at its most fun. Maybe I shouldn't say at its most fun, but to me, I want to see stories about the Jedi and the Sith. That's the stuff that I really get excited over. That's the juicy stuff that I like to dive into. So I want there to be new stories that focus on the Jedi, focus on the Sith, and that struggle between those two orders. So yeah, I do think that the Jedi Order should, at least in theory, return, but not to the way that we saw them in the prequels. It should be hopefully a cautionary tale to any new individuals looking to restore the Jedi Order. But I would love to see the Order rebuilt post Return of the Jedi. Their numbers are in the thousands, and we see them fighting the Sith and whatever the Sith look like at that point in time, because I think that would be super dope. It would be super fun. Many fans, including myself, would really like to see that. So yeah, sign me up for that. All right, let's get to, let me catch up with the chat. Chat's been popping off. So Daniel Panther, sounds more like Legends Legacy comic than Darth Krayt and his Rule of Two. Yeah, kind of, but at that point with Darth Krayt, so Daniel's referring to the John Ostrander's Star Wars Legacy series, which takes place in like 100, I can't remember the exact date. Is it 125, 150 ABY? So 125 to 150 years after the Battle of Yavin. Luke Skywalker was able to restore the Jedi Order, and then through Darth Krayt's machination and his one Sith, his Sith Order was referred to as the One Sith. They were able to destroy the Jedi Order again, and there's a small amount of Jedi that have survived that purge. One of them being I can't remember how he's related to Luke Skywalker, if he's like his great grandson or whatever the hell. I can't remember exactly. But Cade Skywalker, a relative of his, is still alive, although he's not really a Jedi. And once the story kicks off, he's a pirate at that point. But a little different. I'm sort of torn with John Ostrander's Star Wars Legacy. There's parts of it that are dope. There are parts of it that are kind of whack. Darth Krayt is really cool. I like the idea of the one Sith. Parts of it I can get down with. Parts of it I'm like, the story, I'm not sure how I feel about it at times. But I mean, yeah, I do really like that. Hey, we're creating a story that's 100-something years in the future from when the events of Return of the Jedi take place, and we're seeing the struggle between the Sith and the Jedi. So I do, even though there are some things about Star Wars Legacy comic series that I'm not the biggest fan of, it is definitely entertaining and has some really, really great moments and some really cool moments in that comic series. If you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend it, because there are some excellent moments. There are a few points in the comic series where I was like, holy shit, this is freaking dope. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. So let's see, any other questions? Luke was shafted in canon, Darth Bane says. I'm gonna give you a hot take here. I was hoping once the sequels were announced, I wanted none of the legacy characters to appear. I didn't want Luke, Leia, Han to appear. I didn't want any story that focused on those characters. I wanted completely new stories that featured completely new characters. And so once it was announced that Han, Leia, Luke, they were all going to appear, I was kind of bummed about that. Luke is I like Luke. He was a character that I enjoyed when I was younger, but as I got older, I'm like, yo, Luke kind of sucks. He's been, I think his appearance in The Mandalorian, in the Book of Boba Fett, in Shadow of the Sith has made me feel like, yo, Luke is kind of dope. But prior to this, once the sequels were announced as being made, I was like, yo, I don't want anything to do with Luke. He's kind of a wiener. So to me, I'm fine with how he's depicted in the sequel trilogy, to be quite honest with you, because he's kind of a crybaby in the original trilogy. I think people seem to forget that. Our boy is a straight up crybaby in A New Hope. But that's a topic for another day. All right. Let's move on to our next question. Casey Wood asks, towards the end of Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, the Executor, is shown crashing into the second Death Star. though it was nowhere near it. Why is this? So before I answer this question, how do you pronounce Vader's flagship? Executor? Executor? I'm curious. I've heard some people pronounce it Executor. Most people I see pronounce it the Executor. But I'm curious how you pronounce it. I obviously pronounce it Executor. But anyway, this is a great question. I had to go back and watch Return of the Jedi because I was like, wait a second, is Casey Wood right? And when I started watching the Battle of Endor scene, I had to watch it a few times. I was like, holy crap. I never realized that the Executor, like Casey mentions, it's definitely not on top of the Death Star, which when we see it, it crashes into the Death Star. I never realized it is nowhere near the second Death Star when we see it for the first time. So we see it completely away from the Death Star, and then later on in the battle, we see it's directly over, and then it winds up crashing into the Death Star, and it blows a significant hole into the Death Star. And I love that moment because you see the look of like, oh my God, we've done it in Admiral Akbar's face. And I know it's a dude or a woman and a person, I should say, in that costume, but just how they act with their body. I love that because it's such a moment of like, holy shit, we've done it. We have defeated this empire that seemed unbeatable. So at the start of the battle, all right, let's talk about it. At the start of the battle, when the Rebel fleet they arrive into the Endor system. They're looking to destroy the Death Star. The Imperial fleet is nowhere to be seen. So this image you see here, right when they jump out of hyperspace, or come out of hyperspace, I should say. All right, you see the second Death Star, you don't see the Imperial fleet. And that's because the Executor, Darth Vader's flagship, and the Imperial fleet moved into position to prevent the rebels from retreating. Admiral Pyatt, who commanded Darth Vader's flagship, he doesn't attack the rebels because Darth Sidious wanted to demonstrate the destructive power of the Death Star's super laser against the rebels' flagship. And once the rebels realized that Sidious and the Empire had laid a trap for them, that's when we then see the Executor and the Imperial fleet. Because when the Rebel Alliance, they come out of hyperspace, they realize that the Empire is jamming their comms on. Ask, how could they jam our comms if they don't know they have no clue we're coming? And it dawns on them, and that's where we get the famous line from Admiral Akbar. It's a trap. But you see here's the Executor right here, which, dude, I love the Executor. It is such a freaking dope ship. Super Star Destroyers are so freaking cool. I love how they look like an arrowhead, and I know Star Destroyers, they also look like an arrowhead, but the Super Star Destroyers really look like an arrowhead, and I love how they look. Like when you see it for the first time in Empire Strikes Back, it looks so freaking dope. Just love the look of Super Star Destroyers, and they're massive. They're huge. I don't know the exact number, but they're quite a number of times larger than regular Star Destroyers. Right, so here's a look at the Executor from the Millennium Falcon's point of view. So this is right when Han and company realize it's a trap that Sidious has laid for them. Here's where we could see the Executor is, and we see the ties coming at them. Later on in the fight, we see the we're on the bridge of the Executor. And this is where Admiral Pyatt is telling one of his, I can't remember if it's his comms officer or who it is exactly, that, hey, our job here, we've been commanded to essentially not allow the Rebel Alliance to flee the system. We need to be able to allow the Death Star to be, for Sidious essentially to make a show of the destructive power of the Death Star. And we can see let me actually go back to this for a second. We can see the Executor at this point in the battle is not anywhere near the second Death Star, right? So it's quite a distance away from it. Once the Death Star started blasting Rebels' capital ships, because we see the Death Star starts blowing ships away, the Rebels moved towards the Empire's Star Destroyers so that the Death Star wouldn't attack them since they were so close to the Imperial fleet. So as the battle rages on, the Rebel Alliance ground assault team, they eventually destroy the shield generator on the forest moon of Endor that was protecting the Death Star. That then allowed Han, Wedge, and another pilot, I don't know the pilot's name, to fly into the superstructure of the Death Star. We then see this A-Wing here blow up the bridge deflector shields for the Executor. Then we see another A-Wing crash into the bridge of the Executor, and then the Executor goes down. And from, what is it called? Not Last Shot. Oh, I cannot remember the name of the novel. It's drawing a blank on me, but I think it came out in like 2017-ish, 2016. We learned that part of the reason why the Executor went down, not just from the A-Wing crashing into the bridge of the Executor, but also a bunch of Rebel pilots had damaged the engines of the Executor. And then it winds up crashing into the Death Star, and it blows this huge hole into the Death Star. And as I mentioned earlier, that's when that look on Admiral Akbar's face of, holy crap, we've done it, we've succeeded. That moment is great. So I couldn't find anything specifically in canon. I couldn't find a specific canon explanation as to why we see the Executor at the start of the battle so far away from the second Death Star. Then later on in the battle, it's right on top of the Death Star. It's destroyed and then crashes into the Death Star and blows a freaking huge hole into it. So nothing that I can find in canon explaining that, but I do think there could be two possible reasons that explain why the Executor was all of a sudden right on top of the Death Star before it was destroyed. So let's start with my first thought. One explanation could be that once the Empire realized that the Death Star's shield generator was down, that it was now vulnerable, and that the Rebels were starting to get the upper hand. So Admiral Pyatt decided to move the Executor closer to the Death Star to help protect it from the Rebels. That seems to make sense to me, considering how powerful and deadly the Executor was. I should have got an image that shows you the size comparison of the Executor compared to a regular Star Destroyer. They're massive. They are so much larger than a regular Star Destroyer. So they're extremely powerful starships. And so once it became obvious that, the Death Star's deflector shield is down, or we need to help protect the Death Star as much as possible. Let's move into a position to help aid the Death Star and fight off the Rebels as they push to take out the Death Star. So I think that's a possibility. Conversely, there's the possibility that the Executor had taken a beating and positioned itself closer to the Death Star, hoping it would provide the Super Star Destroyer with protection from the Rebels' assault. That I could also see as being a possibility. So this image here kind of gives you an idea of the size comparison, the difference in sizes between Super Star Destroyer and a regular Star Destroyer. But right before we see the A-Wing crash into the bridge and take out the Executor, we learn that the bridge deflector shields have been taken out from two other A-Wings. Right, that's where we see, right here, we see two A-Wings blowing up the bridge deflector shield. And I think it's plausible that the Executor wound up taking such a beating that Piet was like, yo, we need to get closer to the Death Star to help us fight off the rebels because we're in trouble. As I mentioned, I'm totally drawing a blank on the name of the novel, but in the canon novel, it's explained that on top of the A-wing crashing into the bridge of the Executor, a bunch of rebel pilots are basically crushing the Executor's engines, taking them out, and that helps bring it down and crash into the Death Star. So I think that could also be an explanation that Piet was like, yo, we need the Death Star to help us out. I'm not exactly sure, outside of needing a big ship to crash into the Death Star for dramatic effect for the film. I'm not sure why the Executor was so close to the Death Star, or why George Lucas and company decided to put the Death Star over, or excuse me, the Executor over the Death Star. I think it was for dramatic effects so that you could see this big, gigantic ship blow a huge hole into the Death Star, and then see Admiral Akbar sit down into his command chair, or his chair in his command deck of his capital ship, and the realization of, oh my God, we have just defeated the Empire. But as far as a canonical explanation, those would be the two things that seem to make the most sense to me. At some point, I believe possibly in 2023, not 100% sure on that, but we should be getting, from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi. So there's been anthology novels that have been released for each of the original trilogy films. So for A New Hope, the first one's called From a Certain Point of View. For Empire Strikes Back, it's From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. And there's going to be From a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi. So that's going to drop at some point. And now those anthology novels, we see the events of that movie play out, but from the viewpoint of other characters not seen in the movie, or I should say from a viewpoint that's not shown in the movie. So in, each of the two From a Certain Point of View novels that we got stories that take place from, stormtroopers, sand people, Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi after he dies in A New Hope, Qui-Gon Jinn. They're fantastic. I love them. And at some point we will get a Return of the Jedi From a Certain Point of View. And I think that could be a cool story to explain, hey, what the hell was the Executor doing? Why was it so close to the Death Star that all of a sudden it winds up getting destroyed and then punctures a humongous hole into the Death Star? So that would be cool. I would be down for that. But as of right now, unless I am unaware of the source in canon where it states why the Executor positioned itself right on top of the Death Star, I'm not aware of the canonical reason for it. So I'm going to say it's either the Executor was looking to defend the Death Star, or it was looking for the Death Star to defend it from the rebels. Fun question. All right, let's see how we're doing with the chat. A lot going on in the chat, but I don't see any questions. So let's move on. All right. For our last question, Mark Laudermilk, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, do you see the sequels as canon in your eyes? Absolutely. Without hesitation, 100%, the sequels are canon. To be quite honest and frank, I find it ridiculous that there are people that think the sequels aren't canon or don't view them as canon. And this is coming from someone that I'm not the biggest fan of the sequels. I have mixed feelings about the sequels. There's things about them that I really like. There's things about them that I don't like, but they're still canon. The sequels are still canon. And regardless of how any of us feel about the sequels or whatever, regardless of whatever whack ass YouTuber says, they're still canon. Lucasfilm is not going to be removing the sequel trilogy from canon. So if you see some idiot YouTuber or someone online saying that they are, that is not going to happen. Lucasfilm is not going to pull this sequel trilogy from canon. No way. Or that it takes place in an alternate timeline. No way. Not going to happen. You know, I what bums me out, and I don't, this is not an attack on Mark or to say that Mark asked this question with malice, a malicious intent, or had a negative intent or a toxic intent, but typically this is usually associated with people that are being toxic. This idea of the sequels are not canon, you know, and I'll never understand why people will be so negative and toxic to the point where they'll say the sequels or anything Lucasfilm has made since Disney has acquired Lucasfilm. To me, it's just nonsense and ridiculous. And it's a bummer because I see this a lot in my comments for my videos. I see it a lot. The amount of negative and toxic comments that I get on my videos about Disney and Lucasfilm can be disheartening at times, and it really shouldn't be surprising, but you know, it still sucks. It's a bummer. You know, I'm going to say that I've said this a bunch in the years that I've been doing this. I am very, very, very grateful that Disney has purchased Lucasfilm because we've gotten a bunch of really great Star Wars stories since then. The sequels might not be your jam. They may not be my jam, but they very well could be something that younger kids that have grown up with the sequels, they might love those. And some dork on the internet foaming out of their mouth about how much they hate them won't change Lucasfilm's mind about those films and that era being canon. Sorry, that's just not gonna happen. The vitriol that fans have for the sequels feels very reminiscent to how people reacted to the prequels. So I'm in my 30s now. I was 13 years old when The Phantom Menace came out, and I can very clearly still remember how people lost their minds and went apeshit about how awful they thought that movie was. Like, I remember seeing news broadcasts about people losing their minds about The Phantom Menace and how much they thought it sucked. But now, myself, people that grew up that were younger than me or around the same age when the prequels came out, we love those films. And even me, the Phantom Menace and and Attack of the Clones are probably two of my least favorite Star Wars films, but bro, I love them. They're still great. They're still fun. But when especially the Phantom Menace got the most hate of the three films. Attack of the Clone got dunked on. Revenge of the Sith was very much viewed positively with audiences. But Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clone, people were ragging on those movies years ago when they came out. And it seems to me now that for people my age, people younger, we universally love the prequels. And I think that as time goes on, the sequels are going to be viewed much more positively because kids that grew up with them will be able to share their thoughts on those three films, just like my nerd ass is sharing my thoughts on Star Wars now, or other people are sharing their thoughts on Star Wars. Eventually, younger kids that grew up with the sequels, they're going to be able to share their thoughts on the sequels. And I think we're going to see the generation that grew up with those sequel trilogies probably speak positively to some degree, because there are definitely flaws with the sequels. I won't sugarcoat it. There are definitely flaws with that trilogy. But there are some really cool things about those films. The Force Awakens, I have conflicted feelings about that film. It's fun. It's a good movie, but it's kind of a carbon copy of A New Hope, which that to me bums me out, because say what you will about the prequels and your thoughts on those movies, George Lucas created something that was unique, something that had not been created for. The Force Awakens kind of feels like a rip of A New Hope. And I get it. I understand why Lucasfilm did it. They wanted to create a new trilogy. They wanted to create something that seemed familiar while also being different for fans. But kind of is a carbon copy of A New Hope, if we're being honest. So because of that alone, that movie is going to be at the bottom of my list of Star Wars movies, but it's a fun movie. I still enjoy it. There are moments in that movie I'm like, yo, this is freaking dope. This is excellent. But it's not going to be my favorite Star Wars movie. People are probably going to be trashing me for saying this. I absolutely love The Last Jedi. One of my favorite Star Wars movies. It is so fucking dope, and I do not care if people disagree with me on that. If you disagree, that's totally fine. That is your right. But it is so good. One of my favorite Star Wars films. And I don't want to go into all the reasons why I love it, but I lost my shit 2 moments during that film. When you see here, when Snoke is killed and we get the throne room fight scene, like literally jaw on the floor in the movie theater. Could not believe it. And then when my homeboy Yoda appears, let me go back. When Force Ghost Yoda appeared, I should also mention I went and saw The Last Jedi in full cosplay with my freaking lightsaber and everything. Like, I was happier than a little kid in a candy store. It was dope. But yeah, those 2 moments in The Last Jedi, like, oh, I loved it. And even within The Last Jedi, there are things that I love about The Last Jedi, but then there's some things like, I don't know how I feel about this. But I feel that's the same thing with the original trilogy too, and the prequel trilogy for me. There are things about them that I absolutely love, and there are things about them that I'm like, they're not the best, but that's okay. And I feel like if you can digest Star Wars that way, that's cool to me. Now, Rise of Skywalker, movie's kind of a hot mess. But with that said, when the movie strikes out, it strikes out badly. Like 3 fastballs right down the middle of home plate, and the batter didn't even swing badly. But when that movie hits, it absolutely crushes. There's that like 30 minutes, 20-minute span in the movie, kind of like towards the middle or like getting towards the ending, the final act of the film. We get Kylo Ren and Rey's duel on Kef Bir. Incredible. One of the best duels in Star Wars. To me, it's not going to beat Obi-Wan and Anakin's duel, or I should say Darth Vader and Obi-Wan's duel on Mustafar, but it is dope, man. It's one of my favorite duels in Star Wars. We get to see Leia die, which is like grueling and heartbreaking. Han appears, and Ben Solo returns to the light side. We see Poe mourning Leia's death, telling her he's not ready. And Lando shows up telling him, hey, man, we felt the same way. You got to keep your head up, instilling hope in Poe. And that movie, dude, or that point of the movie, like, I kid you not, I cried. I went and saw that movie like 3 or 4 times in theaters. Every single time I went and saw it in the theater, and then even once it went on to Disney Plus, would like cry my eyes out like a baby during that entire 30-minute stretch. It is like, it hits me big time, that part of the film. So I say this because we all have things with Star Wars that we like. There are things that we don't like. And that's fine, guys. We can disagree on stuff. You could tell me in the comments, I don't like something that you like, or I disagree with something that you think or that you like, and that's fine with me, and we could have a discussion about it. But to me, when it gets toxic, when we start attacking people, that is problematic, and that's not cool. I love Yoda, but if you think he's a piece of crap, he's a crappy frog guy that sucks, hey, that's cool. That's your prerogative, right? But I love him, and that's cool too. I've said this a ton since I've started this channel, but my view on Star Wars is the same way that I view coffee. Any coffee is better than no coffee. If I'm waking up in the morning, I need to have coffee. And I like really strong coffee, but if all I've got is watered down, crappy coffee, I'm going to take it because I need coffee. And Star Wars is the same thing for me. Any Star Wars, whatever it is better than no Star Wars. I just started watching Cyberpunk Edge Runners and getting obsessed with Cyberpunk 2077 and that universe, that world that has been created. Freaking love that show, and I freaking love that game. And guys, I want to like dive headfirst into that world, and guess what? I really can't. All we've got is the game, Cyberpunk Edge Runners, like 2 comics, and then there's a book coming out in August, and that's it. So someone like me who's become obsessed with Cyberpunk, I've got like nothing aside from a game and a handful of comics that I could dive into to explore that universe. Whereas talk about Star Wars, there is endless stuff at this point, books, comics, movies, shows that we get to dive into Star Wars. So I think we can all have our different takes and our different views on Star Wars, and that's totally cool. But hey, respect other people's views on Star Wars. Let's not try to dunk on Kathleen Kennedy. People love to shit on Kathleen Kennedy and say that she's the downfall of Lucasfilm, but then totally turn a blind eye to the fact that, hey, they love The Mandalorian, or they love The Clone Wars, or they love whatever, and that she had a part in those freaking stories. So just be chill, just be cool. We could all we're all Star Wars fans, right? Don't be a jerk, essentially. And to go back to Mark's thing about the sequels potentially not being canon in my eyes, I do think that that's something rooted in people being jerks. Don't be a freaking jerk. Just enjoy Star Wars. Enjoy that we get an endless stream of Star Wars content, probably now from now until we die, which, like, dude, that makes me so excited, man. We get a new book. I legitimately, so I pre-order like every single Star Wars book that comes out. I legitimately cannot read these books fast enough. Like, I've got 2 or 3 books that I'm waiting to get through because I'm still trying to crush, oh my God, what's the High Republic novel that I'm reading? Path of Deceit. I've been a little Cyberpunk I've been playing Cyberpunk into the wee hours of the night when I should be getting ready to go to bed for work. So I haven't been reading as much Star Wars as I'd like, but I can't keep up with Star Wars novels even when I'm reading every single freaking night because we get a new book like every damn month. So I feel like as Star Wars fans, we should be appreciative of that. We should be thankful and grateful that we are getting Star Wars stuff because, like I said, I'm super big Cyberpunk fan now, and I've got, like, once I finish up this game, I think there's going to be a new expansion or a new patch that's going to add stories to the game, and then the developer of that game basically said that is it, which, like, bums me the hell out. And they also said that they're probably not doing a season 2 of Edge Runners, which, like, crushes me. So let's just all be cool and enjoy Star Wars while we can and while we got it. So, man, kind of talked about a lot of different stuff, a wide variety of stuff. If you did not, I got a bunch of questions, some of which I didn't answer. If you did not see your question answered, keep a lookout because there's a good chance that question might be answered in future Q&As. I've been wanting to stream some gameplay of Fallen Order, but like I said, I've been obsessed with Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm like, yo, I'd rather do these Q&As. These are so much fun, so I'd rather do Q&A than stream Fallen Order, because with work and my schedule, it's been a little tricky. So at some point, especially I got some time off of work between Christmas and New Year's, I'm probably going to start getting back into streaming Fallen Order. And for the Q&As, like I said, if you left me a question but didn't see your question today, keep a lookout because you might get that question answered in future Q&As. All right, let me check out the chat, see what y'all are talking about. Where do we leave off? So Darth Bane says, I love a lot about Disney Star Wars, to be honest. Everything they've put out after the sequels has been brilliant. And I kind of agree with you, Darth Bane. Now, let me preface this by saying I think Lucasfilm learned a tough and well-deserved lesson with the sequels, which is why we've seen them pivot to their whole thing when Lucasfilm acquired Disney was, hey, we're going to pump out Star Wars stories. That immediately, I shouldn't say immediately, that changed once The Last Jedi came out. And now they've been focusing more on shows. We've been getting High Republic books and comics. I think if you almost look at Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm through the same lens of like the MCU and Disney purchasing Marvel Studios, bro, that first phase of movies from the MCU are straight trash. And I me being a hypocrite, talking about not dunking on Star Wars. So let me rephrase that. The first series, a lot of the first series, phase 1 MCU movies are not my jam, and I don't particularly like them. But after that, they start to get like really good. And I think I'm looking at Star Wars kind of, it seems to me it's almost the same thing where like Marvel Studios was trying to find its footing, trying to find a formula for storytelling or ways to tell stories that would be captivating and interesting for people. And learning those lessons and then bringing those lessons into their next phases. I think that's what we're seeing happening with Lucasfilm. You know, seeing people like Taika Waititi being linked to creating a Star Wars film. I shouldn't say even linked. He will be creating a Star Wars film. People like Damon Lindelof, who has created some really excellent shows, being linked to creating Star Wars films. I think Lucasfilm has learned from their mistake of not planning out a series of films. But I really like a lot of the stuff that we've got. If you take the sequel trilogy films out, a lot of the shows that we've got have been dope. Mandalorian has been great. Book of Boba Fett, not my favorite thing, but it has freaking some of the best moments in all of Star Wars. Like, I talked about this last week or the week before. Bro, those last like 2 episodes, episode 5 and 6 of Book of Boba Fett, where we see Grogu with Luke training, like, and Din's story playing out, and the Night of 1,000 Tears, like, just incredible. I know the Obi-Wan Kenobi show wasn't everyone's jam, but I really enjoyed that. The cartoons that we've got have been a ton of fun. So I think we've gotten some really great stuff, and I think Lucasfilm, like I said, I think they have learned, at least I hope they've learned from when they released the sequel trilogy, and understanding that, hey, we need to plan things out before we release a series of films. All right, let's see what else. What other questions that we got, or are there any novels you'd like to see adapted as standalone, or a trilogy of movies, or possibly a TV show? Oh, bro, I talked about this last week. Like, I say this, but then on one hand, I'm like, I 100% want this. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, I don't know. So the Bane trilogy, like, oh my God, even if it was a comic book series, like, we got a comic book series, a canon comic that delves into Darth Bane's creation of the Order of the Sith Lords, his rule of 2, like, that would be incredible. A movie or a television series would be incredible. Darth Plagueis, I would love maybe not a total adaptation of the Darth Plagueis novel, but seeing Darth Plagueis would be so dope, which I think we're, fingers crossed, I'm hoping we're going to see Darth Plagueis in the acolyte. That's my hope. So I would say if I had to choose one, it's probably going to be the Drew Karpyshyn's Darth Bane trilogy. My thing when it comes to Star Wars has been the Sith. That's like, as much as I love characters like Yoda, the Sith are what makes me like get so pumped about Star Wars, and especially learning Sith lore and about ancient Sith. So I would be so pumped. The only thing is, it's a tight rope to walk with characters that people have a ton of connection to and a ton of baggage with, because look at how people reacted to how Luke is portrayed in the sequel trilogy. And if a series of show or movies or a show comes out showing Darth Bane's story and it's not exactly like how it's depicted in Drew Karpyshyn's novel, people will probably lose their mind. So tight walk that Lucasfilm has to walk, but hey, that's not my job. So, bro, give me Darth Bane. That would probably be my pick. If I could only choose one, it would be, bro, Darth Bane, show, movie, books, comics, whatever. Give me more canon stuff about Darth Bane. So that's what I would pick. So let's see, any other final questions or comments? Kyber Reach asks, do you think Rey should have a double-bladed lightsaber or a single-bladed or two single blades? Oh, that's a good question. Bro, that's a good question. Let me pull up Rey's lightsaber quickly. So, at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, we see our homegirl Rey. Let me get to her photos. We see Rey's got a new lightsaber, and it's made from her like staff that we've seen her wield throughout the sequel trilogy. And it's only a single bladed lightsaber. Still looks so freaking cool. I feel like that was a missed opportunity by J.J. Abrams. Bro, we see her rocking that, and let me move this over. We see her rocking that staff. Why not make her have a double-bladed lightsaber? I would love if we see that she either rocks two single-bladed lightsabers or a double-bladed lightsaber. That would be so dope. You know, you see, and this goes back to the what I was mentioning about the prequels, why they should be a cautionary tale. That Jedi Order should be a cautionary tale to any new Jedi Orders that are created. You don't see Jedi during the prequels other than like Pong Krell rocking double-bladed lightsabers. You don't see too many Jedi rocking dual single-bladed lightsabers. Obviously, Ahsoka does. But part of that was because that sort of stuff sometimes was viewed as like more offensive based, right? And the Jedi are not supposed to, they're not supposed to kill. They're not supposed to be thinking about attacking someone offensively, right? It's defense to protect life. And a double-bladed lightsaber, utilizing dual lightsabers, to some Jedi that was viewed as, hey, we shouldn't have those because really that goes against our viewpoints and the tenets of the Jedi Order. But I do think, hey, Rey rocking a double-bladed lightsaber or a two single-bladed lightsabers, or bro, a freaking lightsaber pike would be sick. That'd be so dope. I would be all about it. So that's a great question. All right. Any other questions? Go back to my boy Darth Sidious looking like a goddamn goblin. Any other last questions or comments? Let's see. Love the Revenge of the Sith as well. Yeah, Revenge of the Sith is freaking dope. I talked about this last week, but there's one moment that gets me, the scene where Anakin is like grappling with whether to go and stop the Jedi and save Sidious, and you see him like ruminating and contemplating his move in the Jedi High Council. That music is so dope. Let's see, any other last questions or comments? I personally think Path of Destruction could be a standalone movie like Rogue One, and it would bring so much Star Wars canon, and of course it would have to be rated R though, so I don't know. Oh, I would love a rated R Star Wars story. I'm really enjoying the current not Darth Vader. I do love the current Darth Vader comic, Greg Pak's Darth Vader comic, but and I'm totally drawing a blank on the author's name now, but the current Bounty Hunters comic series. Part of it because I feel like that's like the closest thing we're going to get to an R-rated Star Wars story. Has some brutal moments in it. I don't think Lucasfilm is ever going to be like, yo, we're going to create an R-rated movie or show. But man, bro, I would lose my mind over an R-rated freaking Darth Bane movie. Are you kidding me? That would be so sick. Almost, I'm trying to think, was Matt Reeves' The Batman R-rated? I think it was PG-13, but it's still kind of brutal. Like, how dope would it be to get a Darth Bane show or movie that is just brutal and it's PG-13 or like a straight up R rating? He's so sick. And yeah, that you bring up a good point, Darth Bane. I'm assuming Darth Bane is talking to us from beyond the nether realms of the Force, but bring up a good point. Hey, that could be a good standalone story. The destruction of the old Sith Order when they numbered hundreds and thousands, to then Darth Bane reorganizing and revolutionizing the Sith Order to only consist of just 2 Sith Lords. That would be dope as a standalone movie, but if it was dope like Rogue One, people would be clamoring for more, and Bane would be that character, be like, yo, give me more, man. Give me more. Plug it right into my damn veins. All right, let's see. Let's see if there's one last question or comment. Darth Bane says Luke is still kind of whiny in Heir to the Empire, Thrawn trilogy too. Which I don't. Heir to the Empire, I believe, is canon, right? And is that the canon? Or is that Heir to the Jedi? I can't remember what that canon story is called. That's one I have not read. That's only like, I've got my running list of canon now. I've read probably at this point like 95% of canon stuff, like all the canon comics, canon books, but there's a few of them that I have not read. And like, I can't remember if it's Heir to the Jedi or Heir to the Empire is with Thrawn, right? I'm like I'm drawing a blank on the names. I'm mixing them up. I definitely probably am mixing them up, but either way, that canon Luke novel is one of the handful of Luke novels that I haven't read. That's still on my list of canon stuff to get down with. All right, one last thing, because we talked about him earlier. Darth Krayt is freaking cool. Former Tusken Raider turned most powerful Sith, just so cool. Yeah, Darth Krayt is really cool. Darth Krayt is a fun character. He's a badass. He looks like a badass. And I do enjoy his story. I really have been, I really enjoy his take on the Sith Order, the idea of the one Sith. So the idea that, hey, there is one Dark Lord of the Sith that is in charge of the Sith Order, kind of like a king of the Sith. And there's a bunch of Sith that are around during that time that are subservient to the Dark Lord of the Sith, and that Sith Lord is Darth Krayt. And his story has been really fun in Star Wars Legacy. And as I mentioned earlier, that would be something I would definitely recommend to folks to read, because it is definitely a fun and a cool comic. All right, guys. I think that's a good stopping point, though. This was a ton of fun. I've been like loving doing these Q&As. I love answering the questions that you guys have been leaving for me and sending my way. I love the chats, the questions that you ask, and the conversations that we have during these. So this is 100% going to be a thing I will continue to do moving forward. I'm not the biggest social media guy, which is kind of like weird considering I have a YouTube channel, but I did put together Twitter accounts and Instagrams for the channel, but I don't use them. So it's pretty much just YouTube and TikTok. We do have a server that I want more people to join, because I want to be able to have continued conversations with people about Star Wars, or when news drops, like, yo, did you guys see this? And nerd out with people about Star Wars. So join our Discord server, so we can keep having these conversations. And then this way, as we continue to have these Q&As each week, you guys could leave questions in the Discord server that I could answer. I would like to get Danny Girl to join me at some point. I gotta talk to her. She's down to join the Q&A, but she wants to get some questions that she feels would be fun to discuss, and she's not as nerdy as I am about talking about, hey, why is the Executor at one point not over the Death Star and then it blows up the Death Star? But Danny Girl will probably join our streams at some point in the future. And then, like I said, once my schedule starts to get a little less crazy, I'll probably get back into streaming Fallen Order, because, man, we got a new Fallen Order coming out. And if you haven't watched that trailer, holy crap. I am like so freaking excited for the Fallen Order sequel, Jedi Survivor. Well, I also can't wait for the freaking book, and I can't remember the name of the book that's coming out. But of course, your boy pre-ordered it. I can't wait to freaking read that one. So, all right, guys, I think that's a good spot to leave it at. If you have not, you jabroni, like this video. Let me know down in the comments. Is there anything that you agreed with that I had to say? Anything you disagreed with? Anything that I mentioned that you thought, hey, that's a good point. I like where Danny Boy's head is at. Let me know down in the comments. Let's keep that conversation going. If you have not, subscribe to our channel, which, bro, what are you doing not subscribing? Subscribe so you can continue to see these live streams each week, see the shorts that I release on a daily basis. But I'm going to go chill out for the night. I'm going to probably go play a little Halo, maybe a little Cyberpunk, drink some freaking eggnog because it is that time of the year. Maybe have a little sugary snacks before bed. But with that said, my friends, may the Force be with you, and stay nerdy.